All right. Hello, everyone. Welcome back to all zero people watching currently. I think.
Hello, everyone.
Yeah. Wow, you're really getting the hang of broadcasting to a popular audience.
Yes.
I never know what to say at the start of the video. Like, hi, it's another video.
You're an expert at talking to zero people.
Yeah. I mean, it seems like no one watches at the beginning, so it doesn't matter. But right.
Well, I think probably if they watch the recorded video afterwards, after it's been streamed, then they see this section. Right?
Yeah, I was making a joke. But...
I see. Okay.
Okay.
Very clever.
Yeah. Thank you. Okay, for all zero people who are watching, what do people guess? Do people think that T-Jump's critique is going to be the one good one that I hint at, or that it's going to be a different one? Chris, do you have a guess?
Since I can't make a novel testable prediction with my guess, I have no opinion on the matter.
What's going on? What was that? Or did you see it flickering back and forth?
I did, yeah.
Okay. Whoa. Okay. That was unhinged. Okay. Okay. Things are not batshit insane now. Okay.
You review the weird consequential portion. Oh, you should maximize preferences. Okay.
Consent. Yeah.
Sure. Okay, so you should maximize preferences.
Consent.
Okay. What do you mean?
Both of them are not doing the full clear sentence. Maximize fulfillment of preferences. Maximize consent. Maximize consent.
Preferences, consent. Yeah.
That would be immoral. So
a lot. For example, if somebody wanted to smack you in the face and you were okay with letting them, it would only be an issue if it violated your consent.
If I was okay with letting them, it wouldn't be a violation of consent.
Okay. So as long as it doesn't violate your consent, then it'd be fine.
Yes. So if you said I'd like to slap you in the face, and I was like, okay, then it wouldn't be immoral. It would be perfectly consensual.
So allowing people to die in the trolley.
Okay, T-Jump. Were there?
Problem you think would violate their consent, correct?
Presumably, yes.
Okay, because they don't wish to die. In the case of allowing people to die who are starving to death in Africa currently, right? This would violate their consent.
Yes, presumably.
Okay, and there are currently people starving to death in Africa, right?
Yes.
And you're currently allowing it?
Well, no, I didn't cause it. So allowing it and causing it are separate things.
You didn't cause the train to go down the train tracks.
Right.
Okay, but you still be allowing them, right, to die if you didn't pull the lever.
Well, allowing is a separate issue here. So if you allowing them, obviously you didn't cause the train tracks, so you didn't kill the 5 people. So would it be moral, if you had all powerful, would it be moral to save all starving people? Yes.
Okay, if you had infinite power, it'd be moral, but that's not the question I asked you.
Okay, I'm trying to figure out what your question is.
It would, in the same way that you currently allowing people to die in Africa violates their consent. That would also be true for the example you already agreed with of you allowing the train to run over the 5 people.
I'm not violating their consent.
You're not. You're allowing it to be. Yeah, and you're allowing it to happen.
Allowing isn't immoral. So allowing, if someone else was beating you to death and me not stopping them isn't immoral because I didn't do it.
So then letting the trolley run over 5.
Yeah, if you see someone beating someone else to death and you allow it to happen, that's not immoral. That's actually virtuous. You should do that.
You're a perfectly fine person.
Yep.
Would be okay. You said in your omni debate it was immoral. They're running over, letting the 5 people get run over and pulling the lever.
An immoral thing occurs because someone's consent is violated, but it's not you're doing the immoral. So
okay,
yes,
it wouldn't be immoral to do it. Okay. So
still 0 people watching. Sad.
So just clarify, there's a difference between an immoral thing happening and you doing an immoral thing.
I agree.
What? There is? This is news to me. Well, I didn't mean to emit a high pitched.
Yeah. That was your reaction to
this isn't
a more mild related idea to action-inaction distinction.
I can quote you directly what you've said it.
Then you misunderstood it. So in the trolley problem, an immoral thing happens, which is somebody dies without their consent. If you don't have the obligation to flip the switch, which I have explained this before in many of my videos, which obviously didn't watch, then you wouldn't be the one who's false. You would be doing an amoral action, even though an immoral action occurred in the scenario. It wasn't you who did it.
So you think in this case you should do the immoral action, not the one that's morally neutral?
Yes, because there's 5 moral actions, which is saving the 5 moral people, saving the 5 people.
Okay, you think saving the 5 people would be the moral action there? So in the same sense,
there's 5 moral actions. You've saved 5 lives and killed 1 immoral, 5 moral. Do the 5 moral things.
Okay, so in the world we currently exist in, I guess then the thing that would
almost like you should do that, but I guess we can't talk about what you should do because you're not omnipotent.
The thing that you should do is going to be the one that brings the most people, the most preferences fulfilled overall, because obviously nature violates the consent otherwise. In the case of these people dying in Africa, obviously, it's like maximizing their preferences to you. If this is the case, your goal is to maximize preferences.
Yeah, I never said maximize preferences. It's not
Well, necessarily maximizing preferences does do what you're asking for, because obviously, hold on, let me explain, right? Before you can't really address an argument you haven't heard. In the case of these, okay, go ahead.
Okay, well, preferences. Remember, I can have the preference for harming you, but if you don't consent to it, then it would be immoral. So it's not about maximizing preferences.
So in the case of you having this preference, right? It's not like I understand what you're saying in this instance, right? But in the case of like people who are incapable of being able to slap somebody, they want the experience of slapping someone, right? This is something that like under your worldview, you should like if you had infinite power, you fulfill this experience even if they don't know it's true, right?
No, not if they wanted to actually have the actual experience of slapping people. Like if they were okay with it being a delusion, then it would be fine.
Do you think there's a difference between preferring something and or preferring something that actually happens and like preferring the experience of it happening?
Yes.
Okay. How do you think somebody could ever like have access to whether or not it did or didn't happen?
Well, whether or not they had epistemic access is irrelevant. So like I would prefer, like Christians would prefer that heaven was real and actually go to heaven, but they wouldn't be able to tell the difference if we put them in the matrix. But they would still prefer it to be real. So you can definitely prefer the real thing as opposed to just the experience.
I agree you can, right? But it's always the case that like would you also prefer the experience of it happening for any person who prefers a certain thing? They would also prefer to experience the thing is true, right? They prefer for it to be true.
Yes.
Okay. So in the case of what we ought to do, it's going to be generally in the real world. It seems to still strongly correlate. Even if you think there's like some niche hypothetical case in the real world, it seems to be it's just the case that it would be the case that like you're trying to maximize preferences.
Well, no, because preferences, again, I can have the preference to harm you. This is why I say I maximize consent, because consent applies 100% to what I'm doing. Okay. Preferences applies.
We maximize just the number of people that consent to things.
So you could violate someone's consent by forcing them to consent to a trillion other things. You could violate someone's consent by giving them a pill that makes them then consent to things for the rest of their life.
Yeah. No, as long as if you like rape someone, but then you like give them the like consent to a dozen other things, Bill, that's a good action.
Just got more consents out of it.
Minimally to what I'm doing, because actually a lot of what people prefer is to harm other people. So no, preference does not correspond to my model. Consent does correspond to my model.
Okay, so just for the sake of like not having the same argument made over and over again in regards to the preference versus consent thing, I'll just grant it because it's the same argument I'm about to make still applies. If your goal is to maximize consent and not preferences, then in this case, the actions you should do if you want to effectively maximize consent would probably be to promote the view that what is moral is what maximizes consent, and what's immoral is what doesn't maximize consent.
Sure.
Okay, so like what we should do if we have any choice over our beliefs whatsoever, even like in your deterministic sort of compatibilist kind of idea of choice, in the same way we call any action what you should do, right? We should have the belief morally that it's that the actions which are the most moral are the ones that seem to maximize consent, the ones that are immoral are the ones that don't maximize consent.
No, those are so what we should do and what counts as objectively moral are two separate things. So even though flipping the lever maximizes
what we should do and what counts as objectively moral are two separate things.
Oh my god.
What a quote. Here, wait, I'm gonna write that down, okay?
Yeah.
Quote, what we should do and what counts as objectively moral are two separate things. Key jump, comma, the moral realist.
It makes me say about what is objectively moral. I said you should believe that this is what's objectively moral.
Yeah, that's the thing. We should not believe what's objectively moral, but we should do what is maximizes consent. So I agree we should do pragmatically what maximizes consent, but we should not believe that that's the objectively moral thing.
And it would maximize consent. Well, you say this, right? But we should.
We objectively should do it, but it's not objectively moral because it's not the most moral thing. What? So
believe this is that promoting that view that maximizing consent is what's moral and not maximizing consent is immoral would, as a view, if you held that and perpetuated that across society and advocated for it, this would maximize consent.
No, it wouldn't be any different here. So you can believe you should do what would maximize consent without believing it's objectively moral because you know what's objectively moral would be perfect consent. So if you know objective morality would be 0 involuntary impositions, and you're doing an action like flipping the switch, which causes an involuntary imposition, you know you're maximizing consent because you're saving 4 people, even though you're causing an immoral thing. So you can tell the difference between knowing that you want to maximize consent and knowing that that's not objective morality because you're still causing 1 involuntary imposition. So no, you.
But now, but he's confusing what we would do in the best possible worlds with what we objectively should do in this.
Yeah. It seems he takes objective morality to mean morality in the cases where it's very easy to have no downsides to any action.
Yep.
You can still say that you should maximize consent without recognizing that it's objective morality.
You should say that's the last part again.
You can know that you should maximize consent even at the cost of a violation of consent, but know at the same time that isn't objective morality. It's not perfectly moral. There's still another standard of perfect morality above that, and you're not meeting that because you are violating that one guy's consent you killed.
Do you think if you told the average person there are times when you have the choice between a morally neutral action and immoral action, and you should choose the immoral action, this would be generally like intuitive to this person? They would understand this easily.
If you qualify that someone else is going to commit an immoral action, you're going to stop them by doing an immoral action to them. Yes.
You think the average person would say you think if the average person heard you should sometimes do immoral actions? This would be intuitive to them.
Yeah, so if you give them an option, you have the option of killing and torturing this one guy, and if you
I agree. I agree. The actual action you should do is intuitive.
No, I'm saying. You have two options. You can do an amoral action of not torturing baby Hitler to death, or you can do an immoral action of torturing baby Hitler to death. Most people are like, yeah, torture baby Hitler to death. They know it's an immoral action, but they're still going to choose to do it over the amoral action of not killing baby Hitler.
So I agree that
Well, people generally wouldn't say that it's immoral to kill baby Hitler. Like, I mean, there's just a much better way of capturing the talk that Jim wants to have. Just say you have some reason not to do it, but you have greater reason to do it.
Would choose this, right?
Yeah.
I think the average person would say this is the moral action, not intuitively understand it's immoral, or they would say you shouldn't do it. In the case of the average deontologist, right? The
original question was: would if some given choice between immoral action and amoral action, would people intuitively choose? I thought that's what it was.
You should listen closer.
Pretty sure that's what you asked. Yeah. Would people intuitively?
This is funny.
If you want,
Weak brain.
at some point, if you want to review the understand that every time I claimed I said something, I was correct. Every time I claimed you said something, I was correct. In this case, that wasn't my question.
No, you were correct. Incorrect all of the time. Like I know for a fact what you said was when you just asked what it was. Go ahead, ask your question. Go ahead, ask your question. Let's get back on track.
Yeah, I would love to.
The posturing is really funny.
Yeah. Well, it's funny is T-Jump, his standard, he thinks like in terms of what responsibility both of them have, it's totally acceptable to just assert that you misunderstood the question. Which then T-Jump does that all the time. But interestingly, he's consistent. So if someone says that he's misunderstood the question, it's kind of it's a trump card against T-Jump, and he doesn't know what to do. He says, "Oh, I did." Oh.
To get back on track, yeah. No, in the case of the average person, would they view this statement when you say the statement? There are sometimes actions which are immoral to do.
Could you slow so I can type this out?
Sure.
Average person. Go ahead.
Sure. So the average person, would they view it as intuitive that there are sometimes actions, they view the statement, right? There are sometimes actions which are immoral that you should do. And they hear that statement just on its own.
No, Papaya Thief. The good one is still in the future. The good one. You can tell that this one's not the good one because it's the one with T-Jump. That's a pretty good heuristic. But yeah, no, the good one's coming up. The good one is, well, I won't spoil it.
Would they view that as intuitive?
That you should do. So you had amoral actions in there somewhere. I don't know where you took that out. It seems like you're changing your question. Would somebody see if there's immoral actions that they should do?
Go ahead.
No.
The answer is no. They wouldn't think it is intuitive.
Right.
Okay. So if you want to convince the average person to do more moral actions, it's usually best to try to keep things simple, right? If your actions are based on, for example, or to do the actions you should do. I'm sorry, I want to make sure I'm not strawmanning you. You don't think people should do moral actions. You think that there's sometimes where they should and sometimes shouldn't. So in the case of somebody, if you want to get them to do the, go ahead. Clarify.
So moral actions, yes, you should do moral actions. Let me use your language. I don't like odds, but yeah, do moral actions.
You think there aren't cases where you should do things that are immoral? Or sorry, you think there are cases where you shouldn't?
He just doesn't like aughts temperamentally.
They scare him.
Yeah, one really funny teacher moment was that Chris and I were watching at one point. Was going through the Phil paper survey. And there were like just many questions. It was obvious that he didn't know like what the hell he was talking about, but he just like staked out of view anyways. The funniest one was like the continuum hypothesis, right? Yeah, I don't know. Do you want to explain the continuum hypothesis or like explain?
Okay, it's between the. It's possible I'm misremembering it, but like between the set of cardinality equal to like the natural numbers, which is like an infinity, but the infinity that describes like the integers 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, the positive integers, and then there's a higher cardinality infinity of the real numbers, which is like every 1 point pi or e, or like the square root of 2, or like 2.333 repeating. And then the question is, are there any sets with cardinality in between those two cardinalities? And the answer to people proved that the answer to the continuum hypothesis is not entailed by the commonly accepted axioms of set theory. And so that basically means you would need to add an axiom to determine what the answer is. But then what makes it very unreasonable for T-Jump to have an opinion on it is that to understand the significance of the continuum hypothesis, you need to have incredibly abstract intuitions about the consequences of having a cardinality in between the natural numbers and the real numbers. And it's completely absurd to have intuitions about cardinalities of infinities just from intuitions of thinking about infinity, not thinking about mathematics.
Yeah. And he didn't know what it was before reading it, but he read the Wikipedia page for like a minute, and he was like, "Yeah, I think there's probably something in between."
Yeah, there probably are. can imagine that.
You don't think there are cases where you shouldn't do what you qualify as a moral
Justified
action?
moral actions. You're asking about justified moral actions, something like that?
No, just moral actions.
Just moral actions?
Moral actions, not justified moral actions.
Uh,
This is confusing. Or if it is, that's
what I
my
think
point.
you're asking is like there are justified immoral actions. So there are times you should do immoral actions, and I think you're trying to make a parallel to the moral actions, saying there are times you shouldn't do moral actions or something like that.
Yes, absolutely.
Okay, so that would be a justified moral. Because I call these justified immoral actions.
I know that's
so
what you're
that
calling
called,
them, right?
That would be called a justified moral action.
I know what you're calling
You're
them.
asking about justified.
I'm
moral
not
actions.
asking. I'm not asking should you do justified moral actions. I'm asking in the case of justified moral actions. There are some that are
what
moral.
What are they?
Yeah, there are some unjustified moral actions.
Justified moral actions. Like
No,
I said,
the unjustified moral actions. Yeah,
Unjustified.
pay closer attention because you shouldn't do them.
Unjustified. No, I'd say there are justified moral actions. Like there's an action that you
That's
think
what I
might
asked.
be.
I didn't ask that. I said
What you're
unjustified
asking
moral
is
actions.
not a mirror in my model. In my model, there's not unjustified moral actions. There are justified moral actions. Actions that you think are moral but may not be, but you're going to do them anyway.
So you should. You're saying you should in the trolley problem. Kill. You should kill the one to save 5 in the trolley problem.
Sure.
Okay, and you shouldn't do otherwise, right?
Shouldn't do otherwise.
You shouldn't. You should not do what you should not do. It's just this is just like
I have no
obviously
idea what
true.
you're asking. Completely incoherent.
This is a pretty okay. This is a pretty. I don't know. If that's a question. In the case of the trolley problem,
Incoherent.
Should you not do the things you should not do? I don't know what you're asking. You're totally incoherent.
Yeah, should
does
you
that
not
even
be a
mean?
bystander? Yeah.
you should pull the lever, right?
Sure.
And you shouldn't not pull the lever, right?
Sure.
Okay, so you understand that now, right?
Sure.
Okay. So
That
there's
would be
something.
amoral, so that'd be wrong. So it would be amoral to not pull the lever. It would
Even
be
to
something you should
So if
not do.
T-jump, if
Does
you
he actually mean amoral? As
No,
in it doesn't. It's neither moral nor immoral. Or just by amoral does he mean immoral?
I think amoral means just things that which have no moral valence.
Yeah. So that's how he's using it because
it's not gibberish at all. It's your system.
Complete gibberish. You know, this is your model. Your models. What you're
pretty
saying.
clear
Literally, the sentences you're saying are dumb as shit. Not
They're not
pulling
dumb
the lever
sentences. Your
is
system is
amoral.
dumb.
Not
You
more,
just
not,
you got a dumb, hard to understand system.
Going back to the.
Look, your sentences are dumb. Your system is dumb. It's all dumb.
sentences.
Stupidity is a proper
Topic because you're an idiot. Not pulling the lever is
I'm
amoral.
the one moving off the topic, correct?
So not pulling the lever is amoral. You have not done an immoral action if you don't pull the lever.
Okay. You haven't done an immoral action if you don't.
Oh, wait, it sounded like T-Jump said pull the liver in that case.
The organ harvester.
Should not, which you agree are different than moral and immoral, right?
Shoulds usually refer to moral and immoral in the context of a moral conversation. In this conversation, pulling the lever, you have done one immoral action. You've killed a guy, and you saved 5. You have done these actions. If you
Sorry,
don't
this
pull
is
the lever,
this is different from your past statement, which
no,
has
it's
been.
not. You're a dumbass.
Yeah, it is.
Don't straw man me. You're a dumbass. Listen to the
It's not a straw man.
actual
I promise it's not a straw man. I promise it's not. I guarantee. 104 in your debate with my good friend Omni, you say verbatim, the objectively moral thing is the best action you can do with infinite power, and you say in 33 seconds, objectively immoral to kill one to save 5, and they should do it.
Again,
So-
you're a dumbass. You're not
Go ahead, I'm
context of the debate. So you being a dumbass and misquoting me out of context, as obviously. So you can say statements that seem on their face value to be contradictory, but then you put them in the context of the debate, like, oh, they're not. So my
As obviously.
model is the same answer I've given every single debate. Not pulling the lever is amoral. But
Okay.
you should pull the lever because you're saving 5 lives. So you're generating moral actions. There's still an immoral action that has occurred there, like I said.
So when there's one amoral action and one immoral action, we should sometimes do the immoral action instead of the amoral action.
Before, like we've asked this before, because you're a dumbass. Yes, 5 people die, which is 5 immoral actions if you don't pull the switch, but you didn't do them. So yes, you should pull the switch to prevent those 5 immoral actions. It isn't you doing those immoral actions. You're just a dumbass who doesn't understand the model. But you're
Okay.
going back to your question.
How about
Back on
this?
topic.
Yes.
Back on topic.
Here's a
You
question.
asked the shouldn't
Go
thingy.
ahead.
The shouldn't thingy.
Did you get it?
Should you pull the switch? Yes. Should you not pull the switch? No. That is super fucking confusing. You're
Okay.
dumbass phrasing that is very fucking confusing. But if you don't pull the switch, it's amoral. You're not
Okay.
immoral for pulling the switch.
What is should short for?
What is should short for?
Yeah.
I don't know. You should do it. I don't know how to.
Sorry, you don't have to answer that. What about should not?
Should not.
I think it would be funny if T-Jump gave like an acronym here, like should. Strongest.
Yeah,
Shouldn't
you
is
can
short for
shorten it,
shouldn't.
you turn it to shouldn't. Yeah,
Yes.
exactly. So in the case of shouldn't, that means should not.
Yes.
Right? So if it's not the case that you should do something, you shouldn't do that.
Right, and I'm saying that's wrong. So you
Okay.
you are not immoral
no,
for
that's
pulling.
not true.
I didn't say anything about you.
Yeah, there can be
Typically not should and should not don't have to be the same.
right. An action can be morally neutral.
Being an immoral person, right? We both
I'm
agree
using
with
that. I'm trying to
This is
figure
kind
out
of like should not is basically just should, but the action is negated. So it's like you should take the negation of some action. Whereas not should is saying there's no should.
Yeah, this reminds me of in a debate with Matt Slick at one point. Matt Slick was like, so with my friend Ethan. So Ethan asked, so Matt Slick was like, do you believe that it's always objectively wrong to torture infants? And Ethan was like, no, I'm a moral anti-realist. Matt Slick was like, okay, So then give me the case where it's objectively right to torture infants.
Oh.
Nathan is like, that's obviously not how it works.
Very funny.
In that dumbass phrasing. Or if I say you should not should you not know? There's three negatives in there. It's a really confusing dumbass phrasing.
No, there were three. There were two. Okay.
No, my answer. I'm putting my answer there. So if you should not do something, if I say no that you should not do something, that's three negatives. You're an idiot. So let's remove the should, and I can just give you the answer. Not pulling the switch is amoral.
Okay, but you don't think that should and should not are based on moral and immoral? You think there actually you should do that? They do?
Yes, in many contexts, of all contexts.
Okay, all right, that's different than what you said earlier, but that's good enough for me.
Obviously, should and moral are tied in. I literally said in the context of morality, should usually implies moral. I said that like 5 minutes ago.
That works for me. That works for me. Okay.
Yes.
So if you should do, then the actions you should do in that context, you should pull the lever, right?
Yes, you said that too.
Okay, and that's the moral actions to pull the lever, right?
No, it'd be one immoral action, 5 moral actions.
So then should same thing as moral.
It's 6 actions. He said 1 immoral action and 5 moral actions. So you take 6 actions when you choose to pull the lever.
7 plus the flipping of the switch, and then the more like ripple effect it has. Like if the guy would have like,
those are all of your
let's
actions.
say one of the people was a plumber, you take like 100,000 actions. Yeah.
Okay, how about this?
Yes, in language, I also usually use those in the same context because it makes sense.
Is there any way I can compel you to use one consistent definition of should and one consistent definition of moral during this conversation?
One consistent definition of should. No, it's like saying objective. Each word has multiple different usages.
Yeah,
so,
but
can I get you to use language consistently? No.
For the sake of the conversation, can I please just get you to narrow down a definition on this? It's impossible to communicate with you if you're constantly changing your definition, so you can pretend there's not a contradiction.
No, I'm trying to mirror my definition to the most commonly used definition, so it's coherent in a conversation, which is what people normally do. This is not hard. Like, no one has problems.
Idea. What's the most commonly used definition of moral? Is it yours?
No one has problems with it.
No.
Okay, so you should use that one, right?
If I was trying to convey morality in the common sense, yes. But since I'm specifically saying mine is different, and I think this one's better, then no, because that would be fucking stupid.
Why not call it different morality then?
Because I think it's what corresponds to the phenomenon that are the things we refer to as moral.
That we refer to as moral? It clearly doesn't. If it's not what the average person believes is moral.
Everyone refers to moral, which is moral intuition, moral progress. Those things are what we refer to as moral. And then if this phenomenon explains those things, then it is a better usage of the word than a...
Well, no, that is not what everyone uses moral to mean. Like, morality is not just whatever explains moral intuition and moral progress. I mean, like, if they were explained by, like, brain worms, or I guess on T-Dub's view, brain particle worms, then that wouldn't be morality, really. It would just be some, like,
colloquial, because the word moral conveys the phenomenon plus a theory. So
to understand what people genuinely think moral means, we have to use a different definition of what they think moral means. This is just
that's a straw man. So that's a
silly argument.
Stop. So what most people mean by moral is a phenomenon plus a theory. Now I'm saying the phenomenon is correct, the theory is wrong. So the word moral, as applied to the phenomenon, is better described with a different theory. So the same phenomenon, different theory. This is not hard to understand. No one in philosophy has a hard time understanding this.
So when you say moral,
no one in philosophy is confused by T-Jumps and same answers, which are accepted by 0 people.
When you say moral, the phenomenon, right? Not moral theory, moral phenomenon. What do you think that is?
Moral intuition, moral progress. The individual examples that we were.
Wait, morality is just moral. What?
It just is. Yeah, it's an identity theory. Morality
is. So then moral realism is just the view that there are such things as moral intuitions and moral progress.
Indeed. Use the word moral to refer to.
So the idea is explaining people's intuitions.
No.
Specifically, that's the phenomenon using the theory to explain it.
And moral progress.
Then the answer is yes, not no.
It's more than that.
Okay, so part of it would be the intuitions.
Yes, okay,
intuitions are based on people's minds, right?
Sure.
Okay, so then it's not mind independent, and your idea isn't objective.
No. So again, the phenomenon, like when I see a color, the color red on your screen, that's a subjective experience. I'm seeing the color red. Now that phenomenon may be explained purely by psychology, like there's no objective color red there, or it could be explained by an objective feature of the world. So obviously, the individual example is a subjective experience, but that doesn't mean that the thing itself is subjective. You're a dumbass.
So if you just said the phenomenon could be subjective.
Yes. T-Jump uses "you're a dumbass" like brackets. Like you're a dumbass statement.
Yeah. It's the conclusion of all of his arguments.
You think it would be subjective.
That's the only thing he's ever argued for, that you're a dumbass.
Yes.
Yeah. Now, I mean, in the case of sin, that's not clear that it's an act. No, just kidding.
But again, the thing they correspond to may be objective.
What is
the intuitions?
Maybe?
Obviously. Yeah, so it's like color. If I see, or I'll use a better example, like a mirage. Like if I'm standing in the desert on a big mountain and I see a mirage of an ocean, the ocean may be there or it may not be there. Now, my subjective experience is clearly a product of my mind. My intuition, my visual senses, all in my mind. But they may or may not correspond to something outside of that. So the intuition or the sense experience is obviously subjective, but we want to know if that is caused by an objective feature of the world. So the phenomenon, the sense experience, is subjective. Yes. Does that mean that the thing itself is subjective? No, it can still actually be there.
I agree. The thing could be there, but you said the thing itself, the phenomenon itself, was intuition and moral progress.
Yeah, like me seeing an oasis. That's the phenomenon. I see an oasis. That's a subjective phenomenon.
Yes. This would mean it's a subjective phenomenon. When we're describing the theory, it would be a subjective thing. If we're describing the psychology of seeing mirages, we'd be describing a subjective experience.
Right, we're describing the subjective experience, and we're saying my hypothesis is that subjective experience is caused by an actual ocean over there. That's a hypothesis. The hypothesis is not saying that because the subjective experience is subjective, therefore the thing you're experiencing is subjective. No, it's saying that because you have subjective experience, this phenomenon can be explained by an actually existing ocean.
So for a guy who seems to claim to believe in like objective morality, it seems like you are completely agnostic on whether morality is actually explained by something objective.
Yeah, it's a hypothesis. I never said I could prove it. If I could prove it, I'd have a Nobel Prize. So it's a hypothesis.
It seems like you don't even have evidence for it.
I do have.
You could prove objective morality, you'd get a Nobel Prize. In what field exactly?
Yeah, it would be medicine.
Did Cinta only update part of this video? Because it says there are 44 minutes left.
Well, maybe maybe one of them quits or something.
Evidence for it. It's moral. It explains the evidence of moral intuition, moral progress. It answers the moral dilemmas and the paradoxes, and it makes reproducible predictions. Now, obviously, I haven't confirmed the predictions. If I had, I'd have a Nobel Prize.
So you think something being true only in like one world would still be subjective?
I don't know.
I think isn't this the thing that Richard Brown catches T-Jump on? Or is that someone else? No, how T-Jump thinks he has yet to prove his hypothesis. It's just a hypothesis that's on the same par as anti-realism.
Yeah, that was Bogardus.
Oh, Bogardus, yeah.
Yeah, that was a funny debate.
Only true in one world, it would be subjective under your definition of subjective. So in this case, if it's only true in the best possible worlds, it would still be subjective.
If it was only true in one world and false in other worlds, then it would be subjectively true.
Yes.
Isn't that what you asked?
Yes.
So yeah, so morality.
I don't know why you have trouble understanding this. For a guy who claims to be so smart, you seem to have really, really trouble understanding simple statements.
Because you talk like a moron. So try to explain it better.
I think, well, if you're claiming I'm talking like a moron, then you talking in a way like completely divergent from the average person.
Explain the question. Explain the question.
What part of it needs to be explained? You already answered it.
You asked the question, and then I said I don't know. And you're like, and so
you
the question.
You didn't say you don't know.
I don't know. Ask your question again.
Okay. T-Jump. It's really difficult to have this conversation if you can't remember the words you said. Right. I'm gonna try my best. Right. To
again, you being a dumbass is not my problem. It's just you being a dumbass. What's your question?
You forgetting what's going on in the conversation.
You being a dumbass, not my problem. Ask the question.
You being a dumbass is not his problem.
Sure. So in the case of your
I need you to ask the question a second time.
Do our corresponds to what is moral. And you're also saying like.
Ask the question again. And stop being a dumbass.
I don't remember it, dumbass. I can't remember the question you asked, dumbass. Ask it again.
The question you asked like a minute ago.
It wasn't a question. You're correct. You already answered the question. Moving on.
Okay.
Unless you have an issue with it, you have an issue with the question?
I didn't understand what your question was, so I can't be sure if I answered it or not. You're asking something about subjectivity and objectivity. So like something can be objectively true. Like a rock exists in this world. It doesn't exist in this world. The rock is objectively true. Sure. But if they're saying that there's an objective.
The rock is objectively true.
Morality.
True. Objectively real?
Yes.
Okay.
Truth is that which corresponds to reality. So real.
Truth corresponds to reality doesn't mean the truth is what is real, right? So
that's literally what that means.
No, correspondence to reality would mean it corresponds to reality, not like whatever is reality. Like if I say chair, this isn't like a true or false statement.
Correspondence is equality.
Wait, does T-Jump think that chairs are true?
Oh my God, principle of charity. To say something true is real is literally a
you can't play principle of charity and you're constantly calling the other person an idiot. I'm sorry, but it doesn't work.
This isn't me. I didn't invent this. You're just a dumbass.
T-Jump, how are you? I'm a dumbass, but I'm not being charitable enough. You're so right, T-Jump. You're the victim.
You're a dumbass. So in philosophy, if you say it is real and it is true, those two can be used as synonyms. It is all the time in papers. You don't need to specify that true refers to a proposition which refers to what is real. It's just a shorthand. You're a fucking
dumbass. I understand true corresponds to reality.
That's an odd shorthand.
T-Jump claims that often in philosophy papers, people say things like chairs are true. Oh my God.
Is it true or false? It's
not this is why you're a dumbass. So in philosophy, you can say, yes, that thing existing is a true thing. That's fine because it's a shorthand for saying that the sentence which expresses its existence is true.
I have a sneaky suspicion that if I ask you for some evidence of this being the way it's used in philosophy, you'll cite me a Stanford Encyclopedia of Philosophy page that doesn't exist with Omni. So I won't do that. All right.
Yeah, he did. He cited a page that did not. Yeah.
The Stanford Encyclopedia pages I listed, I literally give the reference to. They all exist. You're a dumbass.
Sorry. You're right. Yeah. Sure.
You asked something about
cited the objections to utilitarianism page, which is not a page.
Yeah.
Sorry, let me be more charitable to you, okay? So in the case of your system, right? Do you believe that you should do actions which are sometimes immoral?
Sure.
Okay, you should sometimes do immoral actions, right?
Yep.
Okay. So is it the case that you should not sometimes do moral actions? Maybe.
Yeah, so there could be an action which you think is moral, but you weren't.
Oh, I yesterday had a person claim that the sentence, that you are wrong, was a complete sentence. No,
that you are wrong?
Yeah.
Yeah, that does not seem like a complete sentence.
It wasn't that you are wrong, but it started with that and had no predicate.
Sure, like if your friend
No, you're a dumbass. Sentences don't have to have subjects with predicates. Philosophy shorthand.
uses moral, you don't know if he wanted it open or not. Should you close his door? There's a probability there. There's like, what is the percent that he wanted it to be open? What is the percent he did not want it to be open? If the percent that he wanted it open is 60%, then you probably shouldn't close his door, even though it might be a moral action.
Okay, so there's sometimes where you shouldn't do a moral action. The answer is yes. Okay, so you think this corresponds to how people generally use the word moral?
No, because you're conflating the word should in there, which has multiple definitions.
Okay, which definition do you want to use for the sake of this discussion? I'll stick to that one definition.
One word. Let's just stick to moral or immoral, not add in moral and should, because they're conflating definitions. Just use one word, moral or should, not both.
So the issue is, there are issues like with the way that you're saying like certain things you should do are immoral. If you say this, then it's like it's reasonable for me to critique the fact there's like an incongruence there. You say that you should just use one word because they're basically synonyms, but then you say there's times you shouldn't do the moral. Hold on, no, you wait. Okay, so in the case of the statements you're saying, right? If you're saying like there are sometimes words or there are sometimes things that you should do that are immoral, and some things you shouldn't do that are moral, and then you're going on to say like you should just use one word because they're synonyms. No, clearly not.
So again, your argument is, and correct me if I'm wrong, it seems that you're saying there is an intuitive difference between the words should and moral as the way random individual people use
you're
them.
wrong.
Okay, how's that wrong?
The average person uses those the exact same way. If you want to explain what the average person refers to when they're referring to moral.
Okay, so you should have shut up and listened to me finish the argument. So
I'm sorry. Let's not there. You said correct me if I'm wrong, and then you were wrong.
Right, so maybe you should have shut up and actually listened to the end of the sentence, which is
You're
like
so upset.
Let's go back to dumbass. The way
I think that's a really effective rhetorical technique. Since like you mad, bro, you mad.
should and moral are used by the intuitions of people and in my model. Do you see how that last part of the sentence kind of clarifies it, dumbass? Like,
I have no idea how it clarifies it.
So
are you okay?
Your argument is that there is a difference between
he was doing a bit of
should and moral.
Yeah, I thought that was also a really good rhetorical technique when so the T-jump was spasming out.
And how they apply to my model.
There's an intuitive difference between the uses of should and moral and how it applies to your model, yes, but not how the average person uses the word should and moral.
I was right. Holy shit, that was the whole point. So that I'll consider that right again. So there is a difference between how the intuitive understanding of should and moral are in average people and how it corresponds to my model. Right?
There's not a difference between how the average person views should and moral. They view the average
that's not what I
person
said. I said there's a difference between how they intuitively.
I understand what you're trying to say. I understand what you're struggling to say, T-Jump.
Yes, then you're dumbass because I was right the entire time.
So you were not right. You said correct me if I was wrong, and then you said something I don't believe.
And then you literally said I was right in the next sentence. So let's go back to the argument.
No, I didn't.
Yes, you literally did. So let's go back to the argument.
Go ahead,
You said that your argument is that there's a
T-jump, or like T-jumping around from point to point.
Changing definitions.
the intuitive usages that most people use these words and how they are used in my model.
There's an intuitive difference between moral and how you use the word moral. You use the word should in the same way the average person
That's literally what I just said, dumbass. So there's an intuitive difference between how people normally use these words.
You asked me a question. You didn't say something.
I was like a yes or a no here. So yes or no.
Okay, well, now you understand the answer is yes, right? It's the same thing we just said.
Yes, thank you.
Okay.
So you did say yes. So
okay.
You said yes. I was right again. Okay.
You're spazzing out. Relax.
So
okay.
If the only thing, like people's intuitions can be wrong, can't they?
No.
Intuitions can be wrong about morals?
Yes.
If what you're describing when you say moral is an intuitive phenomenon, then no.
Then you're a dumbass. So can some people be right, some people's intuitions be right, and some people's intuitions be wrong?
The answer to is some people's intuition sometimes wrong? Yes, but not when it's about intuitions. Dumbass.
So you think people can't be wrong when they think about what
their intuition is? I think there seems to be a dumbass phenomena where he who accuses the other of being a dumbass is at that moment being a dumbass. Because what Synth is saying is dumb.
Well, it seemed like his point was maybe our intuitions about our intuitions will always be reliable. Like that's like maybe more like an introspective claim. Or that and like T-Jump was at one point what he said was basically that there's an identity between morality and intuitions, which I think if you were to make him realize what that means, he wouldn't believe that, but he did say that. And then if there is an identity between what's moral and what's intuitive, then it seems like your intuitions would never go wrong because, well, yeah, it's like saying subjective, you know, like if you say that what you think is wrong, then you'll always be right in your judgments.
Yeah, okay.
I don't think the average person's intuitions about morals are about other people's intuitions.
Literally is kind of a thing, but irrelevant.
No, it isn't. Substantiate? No, not irrelevant. Substantiate that.
Let's try to go back to the point.
Not irrelevant. Substantiate that.
Try to go back to the point. So
let's run away from the thing you said again. Classic T-Jump. Tom jumping away. Go ahead.
Come on, Kitty. Like, focus your little tiny brain here. Let's go. The point I was making before, as I said, like, can people's intuitions about morality be wrong? So people have an intuition that moral applies to this set of beliefs. Can they be wrong?
That's a really confusing way of talking. That moral applies to this set of beliefs.
Yeah, I don't know what that could mean.
Because they're about somebody's belief.
No, I'll say it again because your tiny little kid brain doesn't understand this. People have a set of moral beliefs. They have an intuition that these are the moral actions. And can they be wrong? Can there be more? Can there be less?
Could they be wrong? If a moral action is defined as an intuition, then no, they can't be wrong.
This is why you shouldn't use his model because he's a dumbass. Like, obviously, any rational
nobody's following along with you right now.
Any rational human. So person A has a belief about morality. They think a Christian thinks it's moral to stone the gays. Could they be wrong?
Could they be wrong about morality? If they're describing their intuitions, then they wouldn't be wrong, right? That's what morals are. If morals are something other than intuitions, they could be wrong.
So this is why we shouldn't adopt his dumbass morality, because he just said, no, a Christian is not wrong if they morally think it's right to moral to stone gays. Like,
no, I don't think that morality describes intuitions. You do.
No, I don't. I think morality is objective. It describes an existing thing. Intuitions are the phenomenon that we're describing.
Yes, that's a phenomenon you're describing when you say moral.
No, you dumbass.
Yes.
I've explained this before.
Okay,
dumbass,
when are we describing that phenomenon?
Shut up.
When are we describing that phenomenon? When are we describing that phenomenon? Just answer the question. When are we describing that phenomenon?
Shut up, dumbass.
When are we describing that phenomenon?
Shut up.
I need to answer this question. Well, I just continue to speak.
Dumbass, shut up and finish. So,
how about this? Just answer my question. I'll talk
dumbass, shut the fuck up.
Hang on. I'm just going to interject in the Damasathon for 1 second, one quick second, okay? And we'll just try to get a little bit of order back in the debate. Sorry, I wrecked the Damasathon flow. I was enjoying it. We'll let DJ finish his flow, and then we'll move over to Synth. Go ahead, TJ.
Okay, so this complete dumbass moron doesn't understand the difference between a phenomenon and the thing which causes the phenomenon. As I mentioned in the analogy before, this dumbass clearly didn't understand that if you see a mirage in the distance, the phenomenon of you seeing the mirage is clearly different from the thing which causes the phenomenon. The phenomenon of morality is our intuitions, which is like the thing we're seeing, the mirage. The mirage is not morality. The intuition is not morality. The intuition is the phenomenon which we use to describe the term morality, which could be like a law of nature. That's what I think it is. I think morality is a law of nature. A law of nature is the ocean, and the phenomenon that we experience through our intuitions is a result of the existing ocean. So no, the morality itself is not the same as the phenomenon of the intuitions. You dumbass. This is not hard.
Okay. Dumbass. T-Jump, when you say morality, you're not describing the phenomenon, which is intuitions.
The phenomenon is the result of the
moral,
thing that exists.
Plus their moral, whatever I think you said, moral progress. Yeah, this is not what you're describing when you say morality.
Those are the phenomenon caused by morality.
Okay, it's
like caused by mirage.
And this is a hypothesis that you have what arguments for?
All of the ones I present in my videos. What does that do with the topic?
Present one of the topic.
What does that do with the topic of the video?
Because the whole debate's about is your system better describing objective morality?
Yeah, my usage of the words and terms is better than yours, regardless of whether or not they ontologically can be proven to exist. So, what does that do with the topic?
So it's just like a circular argument. You're like making the same claim that your moral system is better, right? Like,
no. I made the argument that my usage of morality is better because mine is based off of a more holistic approach to morality. So I said that if we get to a technological age of we have infinite resources, the way they assess morality is better than all.
That made T-Jim sound like a wellness guru. My approach to morality is better. Mine is based on a holistic approach.
Yeah.
Healing both the mind and the body.
Here is a model that I think will predict that. Therefore, this is a way to better assess morality than our current subjective approach, which is what you're doing.
So why would in their system they not be utilitarians, given that people are trending more and more towards utilitarianism?
Why would they not be? I don't know enough about utilitarianism to answer that exactly. So I would say that in their system they would.
Like T-Gem's, it's like T-Gem's solution to is ideal observers, and you're like, okay, but why wouldn't the ideal observers be utilitarians? And he's like, I don't know enough about utilitarianism to explain why being rational and impartial wouldn't make us.
It's moral to flip the switch or whatever.
It would say it's always moral to flip the switch in their morality.
Not. So I'd say they're going to disagree with your assessment of morality today.
So why would these super intelligent people disagree?
Because in their system, any involuntary imposition of will is going to be seen as immoral, and so it won't be seen as moral to flip the switch.
You think a system that's going to be the system of the future, you think is one in which the whole point is not to have any involuntary imposition of will?
Yes.
Can you point me to any kind of empirical data that shows there's some kind of trend towards that?
Moral progress.
Moral progress seems to not be trending towards that.
Yes, it does. What are you talking about?
I like how Sid was like, can you give empirical data? And T-Jim's answer was just to blurt out the word that were the words moral progress.
No, it seems that people are coming more and more closer to a utilitarian worldview over time. It seems like if you look at the average person, it seems like they're less and less in favor of, I guess this is something similar to the NAP almost.
Utilitarianism actually fails in a lot of cases because many people think that it's moral to do things that we can't do, like just feed everyone or whatever, even if we didn't have enough resources, or give everyone homes, even if it caused the economy to collapse. We're not saying liberalism, the whole thing, it is literally a thing. But our moral
liberalism,
it's either converging towards deontology and but not NAP deontology, or converging towards utilitarianism, or I guess virtue ethics or something. But yeah, it seems very odd to argue that it's converging towards libertarian ethics.
No, again, you're a dumbass, Chris. You're a dumbass.
Well, yeah, you brought it up, right? So don't bring up things you think are relevant to discussion. So in the case of liberalism, this was founded by utilitarians in its current form, like J.S. Mill, and the current view within. So this means liberalism, part of the liberal ideology, would be utilitarianism.
Yeah, except the vast majority of liberals want to advocate for things which aren't actually possible.
The vast majority of liberals seem to have utilitarian intuitions. They don't seem to advocate for things they don't think are possible.
They definitely don't. That's completely contradictory to everything in psychology and sociology. They do not have utilitarian
substantially.
So
everything in psychology and sociology shows that people don't have utilitarian.
Liberals advocate for things as moral regardless of whether or not they're possible. They're possibility. Utilitarianism is based on our current possibilities, current limited possibilities. Liberals do not base things based off of our current possibilities. They acknowledge that we should do things beyond our current means. So,
what? So liberals advocate doing impossible things? They say, we should turn the... Since when do people advocate? Maybe they do advocate impossible things, but if they're doing that, they think they're possible. Nobody advocates something that they themselves think is impossible.
Liberals liberals, unlike utilitarians, advocate impossible things.
Utilitarianism is wrong here exactly for that reason, is that we acknowledge morality is true, independent of our current limitations. And if you're basing it off of our current limitations, it's not relevant to what is objectively moral.
So I guess could I ask you for like an example, I guess, of a thing a liberal thinks isn't possible, but would be moral to do, even if it's not possible?
Let's see.
Seems like odd implies can is pretty common, I believe.
Ought implies can? No, actually not even philosophy.
Okay, he's shifting it. I want to see his answer to this.
Wait, but odd implies, okay, since, okay, well, I'll tell you.
That is
Pretty
not
It's related. Yeah.
Especially within philosophy. It's very
actually not. Actually, no, it's actually pretty rejected in a lot of
no, we can look at polling data. We can look at polling data. I'm sorry, we can look at philosophers. I think this is polling. I think this is absolutely polling data.
Yeah, go ahead. Find me a polling data on odd implies can. Go ahead.
So the polling data on specifically odd implies can, I think
Yes,
is pretty analogous to like somebody.
Oh, so you can't find me, so you're making shit up. Oh,
no, I didn't.
I'm
You should
sorry,
listen closer.
You're making shit up.
I think you misheard me, buddy. You should listen closer.
Oh,
The average,
okay.
the average.
Yes, 63% say yes in the full paper survey.
Maybe
Okay.
no, actually not.
28% say no.
Wait, was this edited? Was there like a jump edit here?
Well, I missed it. Yeah.
From 29,
Polling data.
37.
I'm sorry, you're
from
polling
a
data
filter-
philosophers.
from a survey paper or from a
I think this is polling. I think this is absolutely polling data.
Yeah, go ahead. Find me a polling data on odd implies can. Go ahead.
So the polling data on specifically odd implies can, I think
Yes,
is
go for
pretty
it.
analogous to like somebody.
Oh, so you can't find me, so you're making shit up. Oh,
No, I didn't.
I'm
You should listen
sorry,
closer.
You're making shit up.
I think you misheard me, buddy. You should listen closer.
Oh,
The average
okay.
a Kantian would think that odd implies
Yeah.
can.
If they're a Kantian, probably, sure, maybe.
Okay.
No, actually not necessarily, because they do.
Are you? You're not sure, so maybe you should hold back a bit before you come and make.
Yeah,
it.
except you made the claim this was poll data, and you have no polls. Where are the polls? So you're full of
I just gave you.
Pull up the Phil paper survey. This is after
Yeah,
the
the
Phil
Phil-
paper survey, right?
Yeah, no,
Yeah.
right. It is on the Phil paper survey. Since didn't know that, but it is, and then I pointed that out,
Yeah.
and then Since linked it now in the chat.
The Phil surveys paper.
Where does it say about odd implies can?
So you said like, oh well, I guess now you're saying you don't really know, because you
Oh, I do,
you
because I
agree
read
with
the
me.
survey paper. Where does it say odd implies can?
So in the case of odd implies can, it doesn't say this directly, but it says
Oh,
this analogous
you're
thing.
making
I'll
it
say
up.
it again. I'll say it again. If somebody's a Kantian, we would know. They
So
believe
you're
odd implies
making shit
can.
up. You're making an assumption about the Kantians, which isn't on the paper.
I'm making an assumption. I'm making an assumption the polling data is right. Yeah, no shit.
Yes,
Dumbass.
No, that's not in the polling data. As you just said, dumbass. It's not
If it's,
there.
I'm sorry. If somebody's a Kantian, then they believe odd implies can.
No,
correct?
that does not follow, dumbass.
It's pretty.
Dumbass.
It doesn't, dumbass.
Yes,
You
it
know
is.
nothing about philosophy.
Dumbass.
Read philosophy,
Sorry,
so
you
it's
teach me about philosophy, T.
Yes, I will.
They shifted the topic. I wanted to see T. Jump's answer to
It's a
an
very
example of the thing liberals think are impossible, but think they should
No,
implement.
you can't say that because they're Kantian, they agree with the vast majority or even a half of Kantian perspective. You can't make that assessment. Dumbass. You're just making shit up.
You get so upset about these like minor things. So in the
Yes,
case of
because
like,
you're wasting time on things that
I
don't matter to the
don't think
topic.
so. I don't think
Go
so. I
back
think
to
they
the
do.
topic.
Okay, so everything I brought up has been addressed with something you said. If it's the case that you think it doesn't matter to the topic, stop bringing up things that don't matter to the
You brought
topic.
it up,
That's your fault.
dumbass.
No, you brought up the fact that like you don't think that odd implies can is something that people generally believe.
Because you brought it up. You were literally the one who
I brought
said
up odd
it
implies can.
Yes,
You brought up the fact you
you
don't think
brought
people
it
believe
up.
this, and now you think it's the case.
Yes,
This
I
is
said
relevant to the
because
topic.
most liberals don't believe
Now that
odd
you're nervous
implies
about whether or
can.
not it's correct, now you don't think it matters to the topic anymore. This is the classic teaching
I'm not
strategy.
in any way
Guys, I'm
nervous
sorry.
at
This
all.
thing I brought up
Crush
seconds
your
ago doesn't really matter to the topic
Crush
anymore.
your dumbass.
You think you're winning right now?
Yes, definitively.
We'll do this afterwards, I guess.
Oh, I don't have to. Like my chat says.
But
I'm
are you
winning.
winning in all?
T. Jump's chat a definitive answer to whether he's winning.
Yeah, no, I think it's funny. Like, the posturing is so funny. They're like, you think you're winning? You think?
Probably not.
Go ahead. You guys have 7 minutes, and then we're going to wrap up with closing statements. and
I'm
we're
ready.
going-
I'm ready to be done. I'm so tired of this kid. So.
Okay. Well, if you guys want to wrap up with closing statements, we can get to the super chats. Now, we do things slightly different on the Crucible. Once the closing statements are done, we can consider the debate over. The moderators take notes the entire time. We generally have questions of our own. But go ahead with closing statements. Synth, allow you to go first.
Sure. So I think during the course of this debate, you saw numerous contradictions. I think T-Jump's community that he's playing to might think he did okay in this. I know that's not going to be the average person watching this, and I think that T-Jump, after he reviews it, that won't be him either. In the case of this debate, we've kind of demonstrated that there are a tremendous amount of like contradictions in T-Jump's worldview, and that's about like all I have to say on that topic. If you have to like go to the point of like you don't have to believe in Kantian ideas to be a Kantian, there's very little I can do to engage with you.
T-Jump, you're up.
So clearly the
Clearly, the dumbass.
dumbass who doesn't know anything about philosophy doesn't understand that you can be a Kantian without accepting literally every Kantian idea, which odd implies can is not intrinsic to Kantian ideas at all. He's just a dumbass. Secondly, there are no contradictions in my worldview, as I explained. He's just complaining about contradictions in the common use of the word should and the common use of the word morality and how mine is distinct from that. It's not an internal contradiction. It's a contradiction between common usage and my morality. Not an internal contradiction. He probably just doesn't know what the word means because he's a dumbass. I'll conclude there.
Now, T-Jump, if the Crucible coins the new drinking game, T-Jump says dumbass, is anybody going to survive?
Depends on how good you are at processing alcohol. Dumbass.
For $2, Dan Zammit says, could a human objectively determine this morality?
What does this mean?
Yeah, I suppose maybe
I assume
charitable interpretation is there's some reliable epistemological process.
Novel testable prediction.
Yeah.
it's currently a hypothesis, but the goal is that yes, we should be able to discover it like a law of physics, like any other law.
It's a law of physics that pulls on our opinions.
Gotcha. And then again for $5 from Dan Zammit, he says, T-Jump, instead of trying to figure out the best of all possible worlds, which nobody will ever agree on, why not just believe in God?
Drowned beings.
Excellent alternative.
A hard contradiction against our understanding of morality. That if a
He
being
didn't
drowns,
do that in all possible worlds, T-Jump.
Well, he did in the ones that he references. So yeah,
That's just fun, and there's a couple more back there that Pedro was pulling up. I did have a couple of questions of my own. I just want to make sure that I got this moral system down. I'm just going to summarize as best I can. You can fill in the holes. The moral system that you use is you're looking to a perfect society conceptually. And you think that whatever that morality would look like in that conceptual perfect society is what is likely to be moral right now. Or we can use it as a guide stone maybe to determine what's moral right now.
I would say that if we get to the point where we're super technologically advanced, they're more likely to have a system of morality that would be objective and be applied to all possible worlds, including ours right now. So they're more likely to have an answer, just like scientists are more likely to have an answer to physics that would apply to all possible worlds. So I think that in morality is the exact same way, that once we get to a point where we're further technologically and sociologically advanced, their models will be more likely to be...
He oscillates between epistemology and ontology, so he's like, well, they would know better. And he's like, that's the
objectively applied, and I think ours is just going to be crap compared to theirs.
Do you think that we should try to conceptualize those types of realities in order to come up with moral systems for right now?
Yes, I mean, obviously, I think we should base what's moral based on...
What's actually, what would be a good thing to point out would be, does T-Jump say for him it's the best possible world with the same moral laws? Because does he think there are possible worlds in which the moral laws are different? Because if he thinks the moral law is basically just like a physical law, most physical laws, there are possible worlds in which the physical laws are different.
Maybe it's a metaphysical law. There's like this metaphysically necessary feature of reality that's
causally efficacious. I guess. Well, he could maybe go Oppie. He could say that these are necessary, but then he has to. But then if you want to say that this universe is, he has to grant that the physical laws could be different, because he says there is a best possible world in which we've been technologically advanced forever. So there is a best possible world in which the physical state is different. Is there also a possible world in which the moral laws are different?
Wow. Contradiction after contradiction.
Technologically advanced, not contingently based on our subjective limitations here and now.
So Dan Zammit never said Christian God, just for the record, T-Jump. So this is kind of like a straw man, kind of being a bit of a dumbass.
No, it was just an assumption based off of probabilities, given that he's probably an American.
Dan Zammit says, I didn't say the Christian God, so I guess your assumption's wrong.
Could be.
Neon Noir.
He didn't say he wasn't Christian, just he didn't say the Christian God, so you're still probably right.
Not really.
Neon Noir.
Christian.
He is Christian. Just
T-Jump right, dumbass.
No. T-Jump, no. You didn't say the Christian God. The chat seems to disagree with you right now, so it's up in the air.
Neon Noir, for £5, I think that's £5, says,
the beast
if
system
and technological advancement means more morality, how do you explain the beast of a system we live under now?
More morality. How do you explain? I don't understand what that means. Like we were on one of the steps towards progress. So I think as we gain more technology, we'll become more moral. And obviously more progress means that our society is more moral than pretty much any society before it. So it's one of the steps on the path.
Gotcha.
Damn.
Well, what did he say?
Didn't say he wasn't Christian, so I said he was Christian.
Yeah, he didn't say his God.
I never said he did. I said he probably.
Damn. T-Jump, we could agree on this.
You're
the dumbass is wrong.
You're a dumbass.
For $5, I'm sorry, from Third Row with Omar said, not here now. I got an interview coming later. Well, thank you for the $5. I hope you did get in here later. I had 2 more quick questions for T-Jump. Where did you come up with this moral system?
Where? Minnesota, Minneapolis, Minnesota was where I was. I don't know what you mean where.
Well, I'm just saying, what was your influences for conceptualizing?
Oh, I was reading a ton about moral realism, moral naturalism, and looking at moral intuition, moral progress, looking at the moral dilemmas, his odds. G.E. Moore's open question argument. I was researching a lot into the field and trying to create my model of what would best explain that.
Just like splurging at moral words.
Yeah.
Like I looked at a lot of the problems. Moral naturalism is not G. Moore's open question argument. In Minnesota.
There was
Stanford Encyclopedia of Philosophy.
Came up with kind of a secular version of ethics that I thought was interesting. Stefan Molyneux. Have you ever?
His is crap.
You don't like his?
No, I like the.
No, but isn't Stefan Molyneux pretty similar to? Isn't Stefan Molyneux something about like
versus absolute side constraints?
what?
Stefan Molyneux endorses absolute side constraints, things that you should like never steal or something.
Google moral naturalism.
But that's like what T-Jump has.
No, T-Jump is like some type of weird consent to maximizing consequences.
Would Stefan Molyneux, or no, I don't think that is what T-Jump is. I feel like he's more like, it seems like extremely different. Well, yeah, I don't know. I guess, yeah, it's hard to say because he changes around what like the should means. And so he says in terms of the pragmatic answers are like consent maximizing consequentialist. but the objective answer would be never violating anyone's will. Like the ideal answer.
Interesting. I always thought you guys would be like on the same page. Have you ever talked to Stefan on this?
No, I'd like to though, because I do find his
Pedro, you get bad feedback, buddy.
Oh.
Yeah, I don't know what's. I think you're like on your non-primary microphone. Is what's going on.
Well, so the biggest problem I think with Stefan Molyneux's model is that his primary argument in defense of his model is that universally preferable belief must be true, because if you disagree with it, it means you must have a universally preferable belief, which is so stupid. The fact that people have preferable beliefs subjectively doesn't necessarily mean that there is an objective one in any way. So his evidence for his model is just crap. It's based off of analytic definitions that don't actually even work. So I definitely have a problem with Stephen's model. Sam Harris's model is far better, but I still have problems with that one.
What about Jordan Peterson's model?
Christianity, you mean?
Yeah.
Well, with the Jordan Peterson model, well, it's very complicated exactly how to conceptualize the type of model. But, well, you have the Sam Harris model. It's about well-being and suffering. And it's like, well, what's the greatest well-being? That's heaven. What's the most suffering? Hell. And it's like you're on a biblical landscape, bucko.
Now you have to start crying.
Well, and the reason why these Antifa thugs do what they do, they're angry at God for the crime of being.
It's so sad. He's a sad boy.
Yep.
It's not terrible, right? It's not terrible.
It's pretty bad. It's pretty bad. The whole drowning millions of babies thing is not the best. The fact that a God being can say anything is immoral.
Well, you have this drowning babies thing. It's like, well, why the hell did God drown babies? And it's like, well, it was a metaphorical drowning of babies. It's like, well, okay, what the hell did that symbolize? Well, and it's very complicated, but when you conceive of it from the standpoint of the whole story as a redemption narrative, it's like, that's the point.
Moral, but it doesn't apply to him, and so he can do whatever he wants with you. Doesn't matter if it's torture or kill or destroy you for any reason. Not the best, because it's clearly subjective. Like, God says it's subjectively real.
Well, this was the part I'm interested about when I was listening. You said,
but the particle says it
in a future where we have like the maximum knowledge, the maximum technology,
okay, yeah.
we're in the maximum spot, right?
Sure.
That's when we get the best objective.
Okay. This one is the good one, okay? This one is just funny. I just watched it.
Utilitarianism. Utilitarianism is an ethical theory that determines right from wrong by focusing on outcomes.
Okay, it's not clear if that's a definition or a property, because if that's a definition, that's woefully incomplete. That's just consequentialism. Utilitarianism is also committed to welfareism.
It is a form of consequentialism. Utilitarianism holds that the most ethical choice is the one that will produce the greatest good for the greatest number. It is the only moral framework that can be used to justify military force.
You're proving this. So that means, wait, do the people who make this video, are they utilitarians?
I don't know.
So they think going to war against the Nazis was unjustified.
That's just an astounding claim. No, I mean, if you read the Stanford Encyclopedia philosophy page about war, it'll by I think the guy's last name is Lazar. I cited in this book. I don't, unlike T-Jump, I don't just randomly browse through like S&P articles. But like it like doesn't even mention the utilitarian account of war. I don't think it talks about like just war.
Yeah. You should. Now you can use this as an argument for utilitarianism. Utilitarianism is the only moral system that can make sense of war.
To justify military force or war. It is also the most common approach to moral reasoning used in business because of the way in which it accounts for costs and benefits.
The businesses and their moral reasoning. Businesses engaging in moral calculus.
Yeah, it has costs and benefits. Therefore, like, what is this claim?
Businesses determine what is best to do and then take that action.
However, because we cannot predict the future, it's difficult to know with certainty whether the consequences of our
We don't need to know with certainty. We just need expected value.
actions will be good.
I think this was
or
a
bad.
fine claim for them to make.
This is one of the limitations of utilitarianism.
Oh, brilliant.
Utilitarianism also has trouble accounting for values such as justice and individual rights.
What individual rights?
Yeah.
For example, assume a hospital has 4 people whose lives depend upon receiving organ transplants: a heart, lungs, a kidney, and a liver. If a healthy person wanders into the hospital, his organs could be harvested to save 4 lives at the expense of 1 life. This would arguably produce the greatest good for the greatest number, but few would consider it an acceptable course of action.
Yeah, I had a debate with Ben Burgess about this, which is the second most recent video on the channel, or third, maybe? Yeah, third, I think. So check that out. And I also have an article about this. Like, we should obviously kill people and harvest their organs, and then we reflect that becomes very clear.
Let alone the most ethical.
In the hypothetical scenarios.
I didn't think that caveat was needed, but I guess if you want to add it, then.
Well, to speak generally, we should obviously harvest people's organs.
Yeah. So, although utilitarianism is arguably the most reason-based approach to determining right and wrong.
Utilitarianism is arguably the most reason-based approach to determining right and wrong. It has obvious limitations.
I think, which is the claim that utilitarianism is the most frequently practiced in business ethics.
Yeah.
And that it's the only way to justify war is so funny. Okay, like that. Yeah, okay. So we're studying, this is like some graduate lecture. Okay, now we've gotten to the really good critique of utilitarianism. If you're there, papaya thief.
She's as partial to the dialogues of Plato as she is to the novels of Hermann Broch, Thomas Mann, or Iris Murdoch. Bernard Williams, the philosopher whom we will be discussing today, was once described as an analytic philosopher with the soul of a general humanist. I think that this description fits Maggie like a glove as well. So I couldn't think of a better person to...
My name is Maggie Shea. I'm a philosophy PhD student here at Princeton, and today, thanks to Professor Frick's generous invitation, I'll be your lecturer. Fortunately, I have as my subject a monograph by one of the most entertaining, eloquent, and humanistic philosophers of the 20th century, Bernard Williams. The essay we read for today is the second half of Utilitarianism, For and Against, a short book which paired Williams' critique with the defense of utilitarianism by J.J.C. Smart, his British-Australian contemporary.
Look, it's no coincidence that the smart one was the utilitarian. It's what the dual process theory predicts. It's what we sleep in for.
The work is a favorite of fresh-faced students and professional philosophers alike. It's easy to see why. Both Smart and Williams present rigorous philosophical argument in a lucid, lively, and unaffected style. Williams, especially, is remembered for his way with words, so it is perhaps no surprise that it was literature which led him to philosophy. Williams was moved, in particular, by a phrase he attributed to countryman D.H. Lawrence. Find your deepest impulse and follow that. I think the influence of this idea upon Williams is apparent in his arguments against utilitarianism we'll consider today. Last week, we examined the doctrine of double effect and confronted the famous trolley problem. Both urged us to consider the moral distinction, if any, between killing and letting die. We asked, does the moral value of a state of affairs depend upon the causal sequence which brought it about? Do a person's intentions affect the goodness or the rightness of her actions? This wasn't the first time Philosophy 202 asked us to put motivation under the microscope. Think back to Michael Stalker's worry that we are moral schizophrenics, unable to integrate the motivational dictates of our moral commitments with some of the most valuable components of human life. Among them, love and friendship. Williams' critique.
Yeah, the thing is, I think that things go best when you adopt certain attitudes towards love and friendship. Like, the utilitarian thing that you should do will sometimes be to adopt constraints on your actions that will result in you taking actions that would not otherwise be prescribed by utilitarianism.
Of utilitarianism weaves together threads from all of these discussions. That's enough, it's as though he's saying, about states of affairs and their moral values. Let's talk about agents and their valuations of the choices they face. What does that mean? Well, consider the approach the act utilitarian takes to moral decision-making. When it comes time to figure out what to do, the act utilitarian tells us, we need simply to determine what course of action will bring about maximal good. The famous cases we'll consider today, Those of George the chemist and, in Williams' outmoded phrase, Jim and the Indians, put pressure on this approach to moral evaluation. Indeed, as Williams puts the point, the first question for philosophy is not, do you agree with utilitarianism's answer, but do you really accept utilitarianism's way of looking at the question?
I would sort of I would disagree with this for a few reasons. One of them is that if utilitarian, I think that we can be less confident in the sort of complex metaphysical picture than in the answers to moral questions. So I think that, if utilitarianism always gets the right answer, that means we should be utilitarians. If it is looking at the question wrong, then that seems like it would entail that it gets the wrong answer in at least some cases, as the wrong way of looking at the question wouldn't get things right in all metaphysically possible scenarios. And I also think that people are generally pretty bad at determining why, at introspecting and figuring out why they came to conclusions. There's a lot of empirical data on this. I think Schwitzgebel had either paper or book called The Limits of Naive Introspection, about how we're just really bad at figuring out our motivations. And so I think that we should more.
Although I disagree with that paper somewhat.
Oh, okay. So you think that our naive introspection is unlimited?
No. But yeah, it's echoing, by the way. But it feels like throughout the paper, he makes a lot of kind of mild. He talks.
Sorry, I meant to remove the stream from the stream, and then I accidentally removed you from the stream because you said.
Let me see. Is it? It's not echoing anymore.
Okay.
But then by the end, he feels like he acts as if he's supported a really strong claim that we can't use introspection for any facts, really, or for any facts of significance.
I disagree with the strong.
Although I might be misremembering. I forget what the
exact
nature of the strong claim was.
But yeah, no. I mean, so I think that we'll be better at carefully analyzing the scenarios for the motivation.
I'd like you to keep that in mind as we.
The thing I was going to say about I feel like the only thing utilitarianism assumes about the question is just that all it assumes is that there are instances where you have a set of options in terms of actions, and that there is a right and wrong answer in at least some of those cases, and then that's all it assumes before it starts making positive claims about the answers to the questions.
Yep.
George has just gotten his PhD in chemistry. He's in desperate need of a job. At the moment, he can't make ends meet, and he, his wife, and his young children are all suffering as a result. An older chemist, aware of George's plight, offers to get him a job in a certain laboratory, which pursues research into chemical and biological warfare. George explains that he can't accept the offer, since he fervently opposes such warfare. But George, the older chemist,
Beta.
You're turning down this job won't make it, or this lab, or this research go away. Somebody's going to do it. Actually, the older chemist goes on, he has some insider knowledge. If George turns down the job, it's going to be given to another young chemist, one with far fewer scruples than George. Someone, let us imagine, with a real passion for developing biochemical technology. Well, what should George do? The utilitarian answer is obvious. George should take the job. Now, you might wonder, is this the right verdict about the case? But that's not the question which concerns Williams, at least not in the main. Rather, he asks us to consider, is this obviously what George should do? And
well, okay, so the thing is, the obviousness of a result from a theory doesn't have to be the same as the obviousness it is obviously the case that if we're a utilitarian, you should kill one to prevent two killings. But that doesn't mean that if we think that utilitarianism is non-obvious, the obviousness conditional on the theory won't have to be the same as the obviousness all things considered, because unless the theory is itself obvious. In terms of this case, so I mean, I really don't have the intuition here that that George should.
Yeah.
I have a very strong intuition that George should take a good job.
Me as well.
I mean, so let's imagine that the harms of the chemical weapons will be 5 extra deaths on average. Well, if we think about it from the standpoint of the victims, the 5 extra people who would be killed, then it begins to seem really obvious when we like take their interests into account. That, George's desire to preserve his personal sanctity shouldn't matter more. We shouldn't sacrifice 5 people at the altar of making it so that George has a good life. I mean, if we just think about like what it, yeah,
yeah, like if you care very deeply about preventing people from dying from biological warfare, then you should be taking the job in this case.
Yeah. So another thing we can do is we can imagine 2 states of the world. Let's imagine that there were like 10 million Georges. And so if they all took the job, like let's say like 1,000 people would be killed. And if none of them did, 1,000,000 people would be killed. Well, then it just seems really obvious that they should take the job. And yet by just making a decision happen more often, that doesn't really affect the moral salience of the decision by itself.
Well, then also I think another thing is if with like non-causal decision theories, then it can sometimes be the right thing to do in utilitarian terms to not take the job if you have reason to believe that all of the other people will come to the same conclusion as you. Then non-causally but evidentially it would be good for you to not take the job, because then nobody would be taking the job. But in like realistic cases, other people aren't thinking the same way as you and they aren't utilitarian, so then it would be good to take the job.
Then we can also this is quoting as something I've written on the subject. So consider a parallel case. George is deciding whether or not to mow the lawn of a neighbor. George, an ardent supporter of animal rights, thinks mowing the lawn is somewhat immoral. However, he knows that if he doesn't mow the lawn, Fred will be hired. Fred has a curious habit of bringing a shotgun to mow the lawn. When he's mowing the lawn, he makes sure to shoot 20 passerbys, throw acid into the face of 20 other passerbys, sexually assault 20 other passerbys, beat 20 other passerbys with a cane, engage in vandalism, treason, assault with a deadly weapon, violation of traffic laws, consumption of every single Title I drug, looting, violation of intellectual property rights, illegal possession of a firearm, sale of heroin to minors, and discrimination on the basis of race. I mean, that case seems structurally analogous to the George case. And yet in that case, it seems really obvious that person should take the job. Like, I didn't know. It just seems like the way that the case was framed makes it analogous. Also, there's this really plausible principle, which is the Pareto principle, which is that if X is good for some and bad for none, that it's good. This entails that he should take the job. His action would be good for some people, bad for none. So one has to reject that. Also, it seems like a benevolent third-party observer would hope that George would take the job. It would, after all, make the world better and reduce the number of dead people in expectation. But it seems like if a perfectly benevolent third-party observer would hope that you would take an action, then that means that you should take the action. Otherwise, what you should do and what a perfect being would hope you would do are in conflict. Williams' verdict additionally requires rejecting an even weaker principle, the negative Pareto principle. According to this, if an action makes some people considerably worse off, resulting in their deaths, for example, and makes no one better off, that action is bad. The principle seems self-evident. It's also not really clear what the motivation is for Williams' principles. The idea may be that morality shouldn't force us to compromise our moral principles, but that's obviously false. A Nazi may have a principle which says that it's good to kill Jews, and morality should clearly force them to compromise their principles. We'll see more talk about the integrity point.
Has the utilitarian taken the proper considerations into account in arriving at this verdict? Williams' answer to both is, of course, a resounding no. Here's why. Consider how George himself would need to think about the choice he faces in order to be a good utilitarian agent. Well, as we said, the utilitarian perspective on the choice George faces makes the decision obvious. He should take the job. More precisely, that perspective involves a kind of tunnel vision. It looks only at the state of affairs that George's decision is likely to bring about. And if George is to be a good utilitarian, he should adopt that tunnel vision himself, making his choice on this basis. In this sense, utilitarianism asks George to view himself as just anybody.
I like the expansive books in the background.
Neither his deep-seated objection to biochemical warfare, nor the fact, rather important in his eyes, that it is he who must get up every morning and labor in the lab for a cause he repudiates, seems to count for anything.
Well, they both count for anything for something in that they make it bad for George. But
And this, Williams argues, is an affront to George's integrity. Here's Williams in his own words, starting on page 116, if you'd like to follow along. How can a man, as a utilitarian agent, come to regard as one satisfaction among others, and a dispensable one, a project or attitude round which he has built his life, just because someone else's projects have so structured the causal scene that that is how the utilitarian sum comes out? To require him to do so is to alienate him in a real sense from his actions and the source of his actions and his own convictions. It is to make him into a channel between the input of everyone's projects, including his own, and an output of optimistic decisions.
Well, but ideally, he would have what he would think is that his action was good. He wouldn't feel like he was laboring for some immoral purpose, because his action is, in fact, good. And so ideally, George would be if George were a utilitarian agent, then it would be good to, then what he would do is he wouldn't regard his action as immoral.
But this is to neglect the extent to which his actions and his decisions have to be seen as the decisions which flow from the projects and attitudes with which he is most closely identified. It is thus, in the most literal sense, an attack on his integrity. End quote. But why, you might wonder.
Sometimes it's good, as I said before, an attack on one's integrity is certainly a cost. That not everything that goes against one's integrity will be all things considered immoral.
Should we care about integrity in the first place? Why shouldn't utilitarianism attack it? Because, if Williams is to be believed, by attacking integrity, utilitarianism alienates us from ourselves. That is, it puts us at odds with our own.
But that's not a valid argument. But so then he thinks no moral system can alienate us from ourselves? Why is that a conceptual truth?
Right. It seems like let's imagine that everybody had this really strong moral conviction to cause as much suffering as possible. It seems like the correct morality would alienate people from themselves.
Fundamental commitments which motivate us and which make our lives our own. What is really...
I might send this person an email. This person seems fun to talk to about utilitarianism.
...be involved in, say, embracing pacifism. Or, more simply, in saying to oneself sincerely, I must never take another person's life. Perhaps it seems to you, as it seemed to Williams, that genuine commitments of this kind are things which we...
But the correct view wouldn't say that the pacifist who should always act on their conviction. If the pacifist needs to take a life to prevent infinite torture, the correct moral view would say that the pacifist should do it, even if they think that it's wrong.
Cannot just forget about, whenever doing so would bring about the best possible outcome. For part of what it means to be committed to something is that one is, committed to it. To adopt the utilitarian perspective on the choices we face is to bracket these fundamental commitments. But to bracket them, Williams says, is already not really to be committed to them. Why don't you take a second to think about this argument? In particular, I'd like you to consider, is it a strike against utilitarianism? And have we encountered any similar arguments against consequentialism before? I myself am put in mind of Stocker's argument. He, remember, proposed that the attitudes involved in love and friendship cannot be reconciled with the optimizing outlook consequentially.
Yeah, Richard Yater Chapel has a lot of stuff about whether utilitarian agents have to adopt bad motivations that I think are worth. And the thing is, the utilitarian thing to do in many cases is to place oneself under some obligation to not always do the utilitarian thing. I think Parfit's Hitchhiker gives a good example of this. So for those who don't know, Parfit's Hitchhiker is you have this perfect utilitarian. He's stranded in the desert, and some selfish hitchhiker comes along and says that they'll take him back to safety. But they'll only take him back to safety if
they predict that they'll go to the bank and give them money after they return them to the town, and they're able to predict what they will do when they return them to town.
Yeah, and so he says, deal, I'll do it. But then they say, wait, but you're a utilitarian, so after you get to town, you have no reason to do it. And so they leave him stranded. The ideal agent would compel themselves to do the non-utilitarian thing sometimes, because being the type of agent who compels oneself to do the non-utilitarian thing sometimes. Like sometimes the set of actions which make things go best will involve committing to and acting on a non-utilitarian action.
Liberalism requires us to adopt. William's point about integrity is, I think, made in the same spirit. Where Stalker argues that consequentialism prevents us from regarding our loved ones in the right way, Williams argues that utilitarianism prevents us from regarding ourselves in the right way.
I'm not too familiar with Stalker's argument, but I don't think that utilitarianism requires regarding our loved ones in the wrong way. I mean, I think that utilitarianism can still carry special obligations, as there's like a strong practical reason to have special obligations to our friends and loved ones. And it seemed like impartiality is just like, I mean, it seems like there's a really plausible moral principle, which is that from the standpoint of what's fundamentally important, our loved ones don't matter more than others. And and so from that standpoint, like that explains, that I think makes the best sense of our obligation to our loved ones. It explains why, despite our loved ones not being fundamentally more important, it makes sense for us to have special obligations to our loved ones, because those sort of practical benefit.
Yeah, or to be of a disposition where you will prioritize the interest of your loved ones over others, because a society of people with that disposition would be a better society in a utilitarian sense.
So what should we make of this integrity-based critique of utilitarianism? Here's one natural objection. Hang on, you might say. Why are you so insistent that utilitarianism can't take George's projects and the value they have in his eyes into account? Pursuing them is a mark in the positive utility column, and being forced to abandon them is a mark in the negative utility column. So, in this way, the utilitarian does factor George's integrity into his moral analysis. Well, as I read him, Williams has at least 3 complaints about this proposal. First, as we've just reviewed, the person with genuine commitments can't view her own commitments in this way. That would amount to a sort of contradiction in terms. Second, it can't be that our
Wait, a person with genuine commitments cannot view his commitments merely as sources of utility. Why?
Yeah, well, and then also I think they can still view them in a direct way, where they are thinking about the consequences, and that's what they're committed to. Like the bad things that will happen if they don't take the action. It's equity, by the way.
Oh. And also, like, from this, so we need to disambiguate 2 different uses of should. One of them is should, like, what would it be best if you did? And then one of them is should, given what you know. Well, if George has a commitment where George thinks that it would be wrong to do it, then given what George knows, what George should do is the non-utilitarian thing. But what George should actually do, and utilitarianism doesn't dispute that. Utilitarianism is a theory of what you should actually do, not what you should do based on what you know. Whoops.
Well, now it's muted for me.
Oh yeah, I think I forgot to unmute. Well, I'm very bad at this, it seems.
pleasure, or whatever, must be grounded in something. As Williams puts it, quote, one has to believe in, or at least want, or quite minimally be content with, other things than pursuing happiness, for there to be anywhere that happiness can come from, end quote.
Yeah, but that's just gonna come down to, like, facts about us as agents. So, like, the reason why we get happiness from, like, acting with friends is just because of facts about ourselves. And so it doesn't produce, and so that seems, so the value, like, why we find it valuable isn't because of positive view. Why we enjoy it doesn't come down to positive utility. The positive utility is grounded in just facts about how we experience it.
Third, to regard one's own commitments in this way is to assimilate them to everyone else's. But that, too, gets our relationship to our own commitments wrong, for it overlooks the fact that they are ours. When a utilitarian sits down to figure out what to do, quote, his own substantial projects and commitments come into it, but only as one lot among others. He is the agent of the satisfaction system who happens to be at a particular point at a particular time. His decisions are a function of all the satisfactions which he can effect from where he is, and this means that the projects of others, to an indeterminately great extent, determine his decision. End quote. So much for Williams.
Yeah, well, but from the point of view of the universe, it seems like other people's projects matter just as much as yours, and should factor into your decisions.
What do you think about the argument from integrity? Why don't you pause the video and take a few minutes to reflect on the following question, which I'll pick up later on in the lecture. If George's commitments stand in the way of his doing what is morally praiseworthy or morally required, how much weight should these commitments be given in our moral calculation about what George ought to do?
It would depend entirely on the philosophic calculus.
What might Williams say?
This is sort of a nice breath of fresh air after the previous brain dead criticism of utilitarianism. Only utilitarianism supports war, and it's frequently used in business.
Yeah,
comparing costs and benefits.
Okay, welcome back. There's one last aspect of the George case which I'd like to highlight. This is the moral significance, if any, of George's intentions. Suppose that George takes the job. Does it count for anything that he does so in order to subvert the development of dangerous technology? As Williams emphasizes, the utilitarian has to answer, no. Indeed, Williams thinks that the utilitarian doesn't have the theoretical resources to distinguish the following two intuitively distinct cases. A. George takes the job. Since he has a principled objection to the success of his own research, he deliberately takes little steps to hinder it. He spills hard-to-acquire reagents, breaks beakers, loses data sheets, and so on. B. Jill, a fellow chemist, takes a similar job at a similar lab. Now, Jill is a very unreflective person. She took this job just because she saw an ad for it, and if you asked her for her view on biochemical warfare, she'd look at you blankly and shrug. Jill is also a very careless person. So at work, she regularly spills hard-to-acquire reagents, breaks beakers...
I really like this. I really like this mental picture of Jill. Jill just sounds like just such a moron. Jill, she has no opinions on anything.
She's not thoughtful. She's bad at her job. It seems like a sexist thought experiment. Typical woman, no moral opinions, bad at their jobs.
Yep.
Loses data sheets, and so on. Indeed, Jill is so careless that she hinders the production of biochemical warfare just as much as George does. Now, consider, is Jill as praiseworthy as George? The utilitarian, of course, says, yes, Jill is just as praiseworthy as George.
No, they don't.
Yeah.
That's not what the utilitarian says. The utilitarian doesn't have to say that praiseworthiness is only determined by the consequences of your actions. It's determined by what you think the consequences of your actions will be and what motivates you to pursue those consequences.
Right. I mean, the thing is, so there are some moral concepts which it makes sense to analyze in purely functional utilitarian terms, like what the right action is. But there are some that are not. So, the account of just what we semantically mean by a good person or by it is going to be is not going to be determined by how positive people are for utility. So, no one's immoral intuition say that, Jeffrey Dahmer was a worse person than Hitler's grandmother. Or, sorry, Hitler's grandmother was a worse person than Jeffrey Dahmer, even though, in terms of which person who caused more harm, it was definitely Hitler's grandmother. And in terms of just who is more blameworthy, well, I mean, the utilitarian would say that we should Jill is more blameworthy because when people are willing to endure a personal sacrifice to do what they think is right, that tends to produce good consequences. So it makes sense to praise those things. So that the utilitarian doesn't have to think that at all.
Of George and Jill's actions are identical, and these are all that count in moral evaluation.
Well, it's all that counts in moral evaluation of the action.
Yeah.
But not of people.
Yeah, these are obviously different things. Well, yeah, it's the link it's odd to assert this link that the consequences of a person's actions entirely determines the quality of that person's character. That seems kind of like an absurd thing to attribute to utilitarians.
Yeah.
But what do you think? Is Jill as praiseworthy as George? My own answer is no.
No.
For it seems to me, when I praise a person's actions, part of what I mean to do is express my approval of their motivation and moral outlook. George's actions, unlike Jill's, express a morally valuable intention. So much for George. Let's turn to our second fictional friend. Here's the case. Jim finds himself in the central square of a South American town. A group of soldiers is about to execute 20 innocent peasants, but Pedro, the soldiers' captain, makes Jim the following offer. If Jim kills one of the peasants himself, the other 19 will be spared. If Jim refuses, Pedro will proceed as planned and the soldiers will kill all 20. The peasants understand their situation and are begging Jim to accept Pedro's offer. What should he do? Now, here, as in the case of George the chemist, the utilitarian verdict is clear. Jim should kill one peasant, saving 19. And here, too, Williams aims to show not that utilitarianism generates the wrong verdict, but that there are morally salient features of Jim's situation which the utilitarian perspective overlooks. Let's approach the Jim case by means of a comparison. Think back to the large man case we encountered last week. A trolley is on course to hit 19 people. An enormous man happens to be standing on a bridge over the tracks as the trolley approaches. If you push the large man onto the tracks, his body will stop the trolley from continuing, killing him but saving the 19. The utilitarian says, push the man onto the tracks, sacrifice one to save 19. To this extent, the case parallels Jim's. Yet, there is an interesting difference between the two. In the Jim case, the one who would be sacrificed to save the 19 will die anyway, no matter what Jim decides. The peasants, remember, are even begging Jim to kill one of them. Indeed, if Jim does kill a peasant, this will constitute what philosophers call a Pareto improvement. Nobody is made worse off than on the alternative, and at least one person in this.
Yeah, I think that the consideration that I presented about the organ harvesting case sort of made this. But yeah, I mean, the fact that it's a Pareto improvement does seem to mean that this case seems really obvious that Williams is wrong.
Well, I think is Williams' view that the right thing to do is to kill the one, but just that the utilitarian doesn't explain why it's the right thing to do? Or is his view that it would be wrong to kill the one?
I think his view is that there's no fact of the matter, so like it's like up to the agent.
Is that what it is? Let's see if she mentions.
Is made better off. Contrast this with the trolley case, where the large man stands to lose something, his life, if the utilitarian course of action is taken. What's interesting is that even though Jim's killing the peasant would be a Pareto improvement, it is by no means obvious what he should do. The question, what does morality require of Jim, isn't trivial.
I mean, I think it's intuitively obvious.
Yeah.
Because, like, if you were to ask every single one of the, you could look at each of the peasants, all of their well-being would be improved, or be no worse off. All of their desires would be better satisfied or no worse off. All of their any objective lists would be better off and no worse off. So it's a Pareto improvement on any conception of well-being. Well, I suppose not, except for like antinatalist conceptions of well-being, where everyone's life is bad.
Yeah, I mean, one question. Yeah. And it's a Pareto improvement. It seems like if something will be better for all of the affected parties and worse for no one, then it's good. I mean, I just have the exactly opposite intuition as the Williams case, and it seems like Williams doesn't clearly have the intuition that you shouldn't do it. Just sort of that it's up to you. But I think that intuition can be explained by the fact that it's like a really tragic case. And so
or like in our conception, we're considering the third case where all of them live, and so there is a way in which things could be better, but due to the constraints of that universe, that option is not available.
Yeah. And so now let's imagine that rather than like killing the guy, like slashing the knife across his throat, or was it a javelin? I feel like it was a javelin. Am I wrong?
I think it was a rifle shooting them or something.
Okay, now let's imagine that they just had to point the rifle in their direction, well, that doesn't seem morally like pointing a rifle in the direction of someone, knowing that they'll die if you do that. Like if you point a rifle and that indicates to someone else that they should assassinate them, that doesn't seem morally different from shooting someone with a rifle. But obviously, if you could just point the rifle in their direction and then it would save 19 people, then you should do it. And so that's like, this is justified by the Pareto principle and by this principle. Just seems, yeah, I mean, I think that, other things that I'm committed to would entail that, like, there are lots of other good reasons. Also, an impartial third-party observer should obviously hope that he does it because it saves the most people.
Yeah, well, then also I think, and things related to like the paralysis argument, that's an argument that says that you have an obligation to take, or that it's acceptable to take potentially Pareto improving actions where it's in expectation. But then you could have a weaker form for Pareto improvements. Because like if you want to say that someone has an obligation to take some action that will save a life, almost certainly that action will cause other people to, like with, long, far down consequences, cause other people to die and cause other people to live. And so it's like you could imagine, like, what if you know that it will only also cause other people to live? It seems like you're obligated to take that action on the basis of being Pareto improving. All you're doing is saving one person's life, and you fail to save other people's lives who are going to die anyway. It still would seem you're obligated to do that.
Yeah.
That morality would permit Jim to let 20 rather than 1 die absurd. And conversely, some find the proposal that morality could require Jim to kill a man absurd. After all, an idea will come back to, Jim isn't the one who made this mess.
But it seems obvious that, like, if Jim had to, like, kill a person to prevent infinite torture of everyone, including the person, that he should kill them. That would be required of morality.
Why should he have to murder somebody? Not to mention, Jim may be deeply committed to, say, nonviolence. He may believe he has a duty never to lay a hand on another human being. Now we must ask, how much weight should a moral theory give?
But if utilitarianism is true, then that view would be wrong. And so if someone holds a wrong view that results in them taking an action, then that doesn't seem to...
One of the point is that what if that view is right?
But the view that, given that this is the integrity objection, this argument is that, like, utilitarianism is objectionably forcing him to do what he feels to be wrong.
Belief, or more broadly, to integrity. Suppose that if Jim shot 1 peasant, 100 would be saved, or 1,000, or 100,000. Are there limits to the leeway morality gives Jim to maintain his commitments? Could it be right for Jim to stick to his guns, even if this means 100,000 more people dying than otherwise would? In thinking about these questions, you needn't feel as though you have only 2 choices. On the one hand, the view that Jim's commitment to nonviolence can never be overridden, and on the other, the view that Jim's commitment to nonviolence doesn't matter at all. Indeed, most philosophers think there's a middle ground. One can be a non-consequentialist without being so uncompromising as to deny that a situation might, when sufficiently extreme, require a person to, say, sacrifice her integrity in the name of the greater good. Here it is helpful to distinguish between moral absolutism and threshold deontology. Moral absolutists hold that there are lines which can never be crossed, no matter how good the consequences of doing so may be. For example, a moral absolutist might hold that it is impermissible to frame and kill an innocent man, even if doing so would save 1 million people from death. Threshold deontologists, by contrast, hold that there are certain lines which cannot be crossed up until a contextually determined point, when the alternative becomes too terrible to accept, as, in Robert Nozick's phrase, when the alternative is catastrophic moral horror. What does all this have to do with Jim? Well, the notion of threshold deontology shows us that the following sort of position is available. One can, unlike the utilitarian, believe that integrity matters and acts as a side constraint on what morality should ask of us. And one can, simultaneously, hold that morality might, in certain extreme situations, require us to act against our own fundamental commitments in order to prevent something really bad from happening. This way of thinking about Jim's situation is attractive, because it allows us, unlike the utilitarian, to assign real moral value to Jim's commitments, without implying that he should leave all 20 peasants to die. Let's turn now to a different aspect of the case, the last topic we'll take up today. Suppose Jim accepts Pedro's offer, shooting 1 peasant to save 19. I'd like you to pause the video and take a few minutes to consider. Is Jim responsible for the death of that peasant? Try to come up with an argument explaining why or why not. See you on the other side.
I would say no, because he couldn't have caused the peasant to live. And to be responsible for something, you should have had the ability to prevent it from happening.
Yeah, I
guess actually I would say, or either that had the ability to do it, or you lack the ability as a result of some prior failing or some failure of character. But in this case, the reason you lack the ability is nothing to do with you. It's entirely to do with the circumstances.
Yeah.
Okay, welcome back. I think it's a striking feature of this case, as contrasted with, say, the large man case, that here we are looking right at the person responsible for creating the morally fraught situation at hand. Before we even start thinking about Jim's obligations, we want to shake Pedro the military captain's shoulder, tell him, hey, stop being such a jerk, don't kill any of the peasants. Utilitarianism, Williams holds, can't make much sense of this impulse.
What? It can.
It absolutely can, because maybe you could convince the general to kill none of them, and that would be better.
Yeah.
I would want to see the quote that she's referencing, because that seems crazy.
For it overlooks Pedro's role in creating the problem Jim confronts. Utilitarianism does so because it embraces the so-called thesis of negative responsibility. This says, if I know that if I do X, O1 will eventuate, and that if I refrain from doing X, O2 will, and that O2 is worse than O1, then I am responsible for O2 if I refrain voluntarily from doing X. Less technically, if I'm ever responsible for anything, then I must be just as much responsible for things that I allow or fail to prevent, as I am for things that I myself, in the more everyday restricted sense, bring about. Williams underlines the thesis to emphasize.
Yeah, I mean, if that's just that utilitarianism denies a doing allowing distinction, sure. But that doesn't entail that you shouldn't shake Pedro's shoulders.
Mm-hmm.
That utilitarianism and its forward-looking focus on states of affairs treats as irrelevant the matter of what or who molded the moral landscapes we now traverse. But against this, the role other agents have played in molding these landscapes does seem morally relevant. To see that this is so, consider a modification of the Jim case, natural disaster. It is foreseeable that 20 peasants will die of a deadly disease unless Jim, who has special medical knowledge, kills one of them and uses his organs to make a drug that will save the other 19. The peasants know this and are begging Jim to kill one of them. Now, many people have the intuition that it would be less justifiable for Jim to refrain from killing one peasant in this case than in the original. What could explain this? Well, in the original case, there is another agent, Pedro, who is turning Jim into a tool for evil, and at whom we can direct our blame. It is Pedro who makes it the case that one man must die for 19 to live. In the vaccine case, by contrast, it is sheer natural circumstance, and unfortunately.
Okay, now let's imagine that the vaccine was created in a lab by this asshole Pedro. Would that really affect the salience of the situation? Would that affect the correct choice in that situation? Of course not.
Unfortunate fact of fate, which introduces this trade-off between the 1 and 19. There's no human wrong here, which Jim, if he kills, abets. Williams' critical point is that, in light of the thesis of negative responsibility, the utilitarian can't explain the intuitive distinction between these two. So what are we to make of all this?
Well, the other thing is utilitarians don't take responsibility to be fundamental. So, like, responsibility is this useful legal heuristic. Well, not just legal. It often makes sense to talk about whether people are responsible for things. There are not. I think that there are cases where there are no robust facts that matter about what you're responsible for.
Although I think that's maybe a standard line, but I think it's even consistent with utilitarianism to say that there are robust facts of the matter about what you're responsible for, and that those are just entirely separate facts from what you have most reason to do.
Yep. Yeah, those are both perfectly reasonable responses.
Should we entirely deny the thesis of negative responsibility? Could it be that we are only responsible for the results of causal sequences which we begin ourselves? This seems too extreme. Suppose Jane checks into a hotel on a business trip. She walks into the bathroom attached to her room and finds a baby sitting in the tub unattended, the water running. Obviously, Jane should turn the water off and remove the baby from danger. But suppose, God forbid, she just continues without a second thought to unpack her suitcase. Jane had nothing to do with filling the tub. She didn't place the baby in it. But surely it's going too far to say that should something happen to the baby, Jane is in no way responsible. A more sophisticated take on negative responsibility comes from the philosophers H.L.A. Hart and A.M. Honoré. They posit a principle we'll call voluntary intervention. This says that when an intervening agent does B, if and only if a primary agent does A, where A is either an action or omission, the primary agent is excluded from moral responsibility for the consequences of B if the intervening agent acts voluntarily in doing B. Applied to the case of Jim and the peasant.
This is too many A's and B's doing things for me to have an intuitive grasp.
The principal case of the voluntary intervention of Pedro relieves Jim, the primary agent, of any responsibility for the death of the 20 peasants, should Jim refuse to kill one. That is, the death of the 20 is attributable only to Pedro, should not be counted as resulting from Jim's refusal to kill. This seems reasonable. Still, I think the principle goes too far in relieving people of responsibility. Suppose my irate neighbor comes over, ranting about how much he hates his wife, and then asks if he can borrow my sharpest kitchen knife. The voluntary intervention principle says that if I hand the knife over, I'm not at all responsible for what happens next. But that, of course, seems wrong. The fundamental problem with Hart and Honoré's principle is that moral responsibility is not a zero-sum game. To borrow Professor Frick's analogy, doling it out is not like divvying up a cake, where each piece gets smaller the larger the number of people with whom it must be shared. There's plenty of responsibility, both positive and negative, to go around. So, the precise method for assigning negative responsibility remains, at least for me, opaque. But one thing is clear, and this is that we have Williams to thank for putting the issue, as so many others, on the table in the first place. Indeed, one of Williams' greatest gifts was an eye for discerning aspects of moral life theretofore neglected by philosophy, a field which more often makes one feel there's nothing new under the sun. His sensitive treatment of agents' relationships to their agency can be seen as an attempt to bring the person back into the conversation about what people ought to do. I'll leave it at that with one last remark. If you're worried you've missed something in Williams' critique, just remember what the wry man himself once observed. Books had instant replay long before televised sports. Thanks.
Well, yeah. I mean, the thing is, I think that our moral concepts are like not super precise, and often the way that we like think about morality doesn't capture the salient features. So, like I think our intuitions about why things are wrong, will often not be the deepest story. So, if you ask why is murder wrong, the intuitive answer is because you kill someone. But that's not the deepest story that can be told. And I think that when we really reflect on it more, the deepest and most fundamentally correct story to be told is the utilitarian one. All right. Any final words before we wrap up?
Nope. Bernard Williams has good ideas, but doesn't. It'd be kind of weird because none of the cases are intuitively compelling as with his intuitive judgments.
Yeah, no,
I do think like repugnant conclusion is maybe something where I accept it, but it's that when I see the intuitive compellingness of the case. But yeah, I find the repugnant with any Pareto improvement
to be just really intuitive.
Yeah, so that's one where we diverge.
Yeah. Which just shows that my intuitions are better than Chris's.
Or responsive to reasons.
Yeah. Yeah. There's one other point I was going to make. Yeah. No, I don't remember what it was. Though yeah, I agree. I think that those cases are like pretty unintuitive.
Yeah.
The Pareto principle is just so deeply intuitive. Like just making everyone better off is a good thing.
Yeah.
But yeah. All right. Thanks for watching. Oh, sorry.
Well, I was just saying, yeah, it's like the Dark Parfit, the non-identity problem. It's like a full step removed from the non-identity problem. They're like, okay, yeah, we can all agree that if your action is just benefiting people, it's clearly good. And then and then we'll go find some quandary from there. Apparently, we should question the Pareto improvement principle.
Yeah. Wow. Papaya Thief seems to be identifying the morally salient features of the stream correctly. All right. Cool.